Hey guys, welcome back. This is our attraction project 6. In this project we are going to see that we have three types of movers. Little blue guys are attracted to the green mover, but they're repelled by or pushed away from the red one. Red guy's the repeller, green guy's the attractor, and if I hit the mouse, everybody gets a brand new velocity. We're not going to get this far in the first video. All we're going to do is create an array of movers. So we have to make a mover constructor function. We're going to fill an array with mover objects, and we're going to add attraction to all of the movers except the first one in the array. Okay, so here's the starting place. We have setup and draw like always. I have a canvas and I'm filling a rectangle so that it's slightly opaque. 32% opacity. Oh, actually in P5 this is a number between 0 and 255. So it's not very opaque. 32 is a very low number. In any case, I want to come over here and I'm just going to set up this with my properties. So we have a constructor function. This function is going to make mover objects, and it's going to pass in, we're going to pass in a location vector. That guy gets passed into this .loc. So remember that a constructor function just has two things. It has properties and it has functions. I can pass in values that get loaded in here, or I can just generate these guys right inside the constructor function. But I can make mover objects from this constructor function, and that's the big idea that we're dealing with right now. So I'm going to do this a couple of different ways. For location, I'm going to create a vector back in the other part of the program and send it in, and then I'm going to take in x and y here and create a second vector using these two parameters that get passed into velocity. And then acceleration, my third vector, is just going to be created here, and I'll generate the x and y components in the update function. Okay, so now I'm going to write the function definitions for update, check edges, and render. And you know what, I think I'll call them, or I'll write them in the same order that they're being called. So update, check edges. I'll put render down here. Again, it doesn't matter as far as the JavaScript is concerned, but just because we're people, we like things to be orderly and easy to follow. This might make it a little bit, I don't know. Anyway, so this is my update function, and right now it's empty. This is my check edges function, and it's empty. And this is my render function, and it's empty. Notice I'm putting them all so they line up vertically, and it will make your code a lot easier to read if you do it like this. Also, if you're using an editor like Atom, you can come over here and say AutoIndent. And so AutoIndent just lines everything up really neatly so everything matches, and it makes your code easier to read. Okay, so I'm going to start with render. Okay, so I'll start down here at the bottom with render, and with render I'm just going to add 2 lines of code, actually 3, the same 3 we saw before. And so these lines of code are going to have fill, stroke, and I'm going to draw an ellipse, and it's going to be drawn at this location, this .loc. So every mover is going to have its own vector for location with its own x component and its own y component. So this is the particular mover. We can have 500 movers in this project. Each one that calls this code is this. So mover 1 is going to be this. When mover 2 calls this code, this is mover 2. And to go inside of the mover, there's a location, there's a vector. And to go inside of the vector, it has an x property. So this .loc.x, this .loc.y, and then inside of each of the movers, there's a diameter. We set the diameter up here on line 8 to 10. Next, I'm going to add in check edges, and check edges is going to be a little bit different than we saw before. In this version of check edges, we have if the location x goes greater than the width. Now remember that we have the upper left-hand corner is 0.00. The width is how wide the canvas is. So if the x location of my mover goes greater than the width, that means it's gone off the right edge of the canvas, so I just set its location back to 0. The x location goes back to 0 on line 22. If I only have one line of code on an if statement, I don't need the curly braces, but this is exactly the same as if I were to take these curly braces and put this guy inside of here. So you can do it either way, but I'm just setting, if it goes off the right edge, set it back to the left edge. If it goes, let's say, greater than the height, that means it's gone off the bottom, then put it back on the top. If it goes off the left edge, then put it back on the right edge. So it's sort of warping to the other side. And so if it goes off of the top, then we're going to see it reappear on the bottom. And so that's how check edges are going to work for this part of the program. Okay, so I could make a separate attractor object, but what I intend to do for this project, I think this will make it a little bit easier. I'm going to make a whole array of movers, and I know that every array starts with an index of 0. So I'll have, let's call this slot 0. So there's going to be a mover in slot 0, a mover in all of these other slots, all the way up to n minus 1, where n is the length of the array. So if there's 100 elements in the array, the last element is going to be 99 because I start at 0. Anyway, the point is, this guy is going to be my attractor, okay? So I have to set up my code so that his attractor and all of these other movers that are in all of the other elements, no matter how many I have, are all going to be attracted to the attractor. Okay, so now I need to set up this in update, and what I want to do is I want to say that I'm going to set up my attraction, but I don't want the attractor to be attracted to itself, so I'm just going to say if this is not the attractor. So the way that I do that is I just set up an if statement, and I say if this, remember all of the movers in the mover array are movers, and so the attractor is a mover, so I'll say if this is not equal to, let's say, movers, and we'll say the first one. We're just going to set the first one equal to 0. So the guy in the first case is not going to be attracted to anything. If it's not in the first element, if it's not in the first slot, then I want to apply attraction. So as I said before, there's 3 lines of code. We have to create an acceleration vector. We call it ACC. And we have to use this special line of code. So I'm not going to talk about what this is really doing. All I need to do is say, what am I attracting to? This is what I'm attracting to. So this dot loc, I'm in this code, right? I know this is not the attractor, so every single one, I could have 500 movers, whichever one's calling this code is this. So this dot loc, and what am I going to be attracted to? Well, the way that you find that is you take p5 vector dot sub. I don't want to explain that to you right now. All I want you to do is say the first element, that's the guy in slot 0. We're going to go, whatever vector this is, this dot loc, is going to be attracted to this guy. So we're going to get a vector pointing from one location to the other, and then I have to normalize it, and when I normalize it, that is set the magnitude of that vector to 1. Okay? So this is sort of math that's outside the scope of this course, but the second thing is I need to then multiply it by some small number. So each frame, I'm going to get a location, I'm going to change that location with velocity, but I'm going to change velocity with acceleration, and that is going to nudge my mover in the direction of whatever it is I'm being attracted to. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to go ahead and say this dot velocity. So this is a mover. I go inside the mover with the dot, and there's a velocity vector. The velocity vector has an add method. To go inside of velocity, I say dot, and I use add, and it's going to take acceleration. This function is simply going to add the x and y components of acceleration to the x and y components of velocity, changing velocity. I do the same thing now with velocity, and I'm going to add it to location. Now there's one more line of code here that I think is kind of important. I'm going to say this dot this dot velocity, and I want to limit it. So inside the vector class or vector constructor function, there is a limit function, and the limit function will limit to whatever number I put inside these parentheses. So I'm going to put, let's say I put a 3 in there. So it can never go faster than 3 pixels per frame. Now if I run this code, nothing's going to happen. And actually I'm kind of violating one of the rules of coding, which is, or that I tell my students, is that you don't write a bunch of code and then run it. You run along the way. And I should say that I am running this code through the tutorial. I'm not showing that every time I run it, but I want to make sure I'm not making mistakes. And so if I were to run this code right now, it would look like this. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and run it, and there are no errors. So I'm actually running my code frequently to make sure I'm not making errors along the way, which is really important. If you code for an hour and a half and then run your code, you're going to find out you've got so many errors. It's not a good idea to do that. So now I'm going to lead my movers. Now, if you're not using Atom and you're using the P5 web editor, then all of this code is going to be in one page. So the constructor function will be down below draw someplace. But I've got this set up so I can see both side by side, and what I want to do is I want to declare a bunch of movers. So I'm just going to say let movers, same way we did it before, is going to be equal to, and I use square braces, and square braces tells JavaScript this is going to be an array. And I could write a function to load these, but I'm not going to. In this case, all I'm going to do is load these right here. So I need to make a for loop, and a for loop is going to work really, really well with an array. So to run a for loop, I need 3 parts inside the parentheses. Let I is equal to 0, semicolon. I is less than whatever number of movers I want. Let's say I want 30 movers. Fine. And I'm going to say semicolon, and now I'll say I plus plus. Okay? So I plus plus means we're going to increment I. We're going to add 1 every time I come in here. So I is going to start at 0, then I, next time I come in, I will be 1, and then 2, and then 3, all the way up to 29. Remember, 29 plus 0 is 30 in this class. Don't tell your math teacher I told you that. In any case, what I want to do is I want to load a new mover into the array movers. I created the array up on line 4, but now I want to use it, and so I'll say movers. Remember, every time I come into this array, I changes. And so I'll just say the first time I'm going to load this with a new mover, so I say new and capital mover. And so that looks pretty good. But notice these guys don't match. If I look over on the right side, mover takes in a vector and then an X location and a Y location. And so I can do that. I can add, first of all, I have to create a guy for location. So it's going to look like this. I create a variable, and actually I should just let this guy be let loc equals create vector the same way you did before. It's going to be somewhere within the width and the height of the canvas, and that's going to be a vector. I'm going to load that guy on line 12 right there. When I make a new mover, I'm sending it a vector called loc, and actually it's going to be received as location over here. And then I'm going to create a random dx and dy. That's change in x and change in y. Those guys are going to be passed in here. Whatever number I get, it's going to be a number between, a random number between -5 and 5 for dx and dy here. Whatever I say over here, it's going to get received over here as x and y, and then I receive those in here, and I'm creating a new velocity vector. So it'll have a location vector, which I've created here on line 9. It's going to receive a new vector here, which I'm creating on line 6 in the mover constructor function. And that will create a whole bunch of movers. Let's go ahead and see if that worked. If I rerun my code, let's see if I get an error. I don't get an error, but if I type in movers here, let's see what I get. Look, I've got 30 movers, and if I have 30 movers, I can see what's inside of them. Notice they have an acceleration vector, a location vector. We can see what the location is. It's got a velocity vector. I can see it's got an x and a y value. So all of these things are what is inside the mover in location 0. And I've got 30 of them. Okay, so to finish this guy off, I'm just going to go down here in the draw function, and I'm going to add a couple lines of code. I'm going to say for I equals 0, I is less than movers.length, I plus plus. And in each individual I, remember I is changing every time I come into the for loop, I'm going to hit the run function, which is going to come over here to line 11 on the mover constructor function. It's going to call these 3 guys, which is going to call the rest of these. Let's see what this looks like. If I were to run it now, and nothing is happening. Okay, the reason nothing was happening was I did not save the code. So I'm going to hit Control S to save it. And come in here, Control S, and now I'm going to go back to this guy, and I'm going to run it. Okay, so now it's running. The problem is I can't tell which guy is the attractor. So I'm going to make one more slight change in my code, and that's down in render. And down in render, I'm just going to add an if statement. And the if statement is going to be if this guy is my first element, I'm going to render it one color, and if it's not my first element, I'm going to render it a different color. So all I have to do is take stroke and fill, and I'm going to put it in these 2 places. Here, I don't know what just happened, here and here, and I'll erase these 2 guys. And so let's see, so this guy is going to be blue. Let's say if it is, let's say this, if this is equal to, remember 3 equal sign says if it's equal to, and let's say movers, and we'll say 0. So if it's the first one, I want to render it red, or let's make it green. So that's going to be the green. Remember RGB, red, green, blue. So this is going to be 255 is going to be green, turned all the way up. And I'm going to turn this guy down to 100, so it'll be mostly green with a little bit of blue. Such a pretty color. Let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. Now, when I run this guy, I see that I have a kind of a greenish guy, and all of the blue guys are attracted to the green guy. And that's it for today. Bye-bye.